Hello. In this video, I want to give you some sense of the way my thinking has developed over the years through which I've been exploring the whole sense of how we live in the world as participants rather than as outsiders, how we're part of it all rather than apart from it all. And that leads to how this course came about. And it all began really when I was doing my PhD and I was trying to study two-person relationships. And if you think about it, it's very difficult to study two-person relationships without the third person, otherwise the researcher, getting in the way and turning it into something else. And one morning I was walking to class down at Elbert Street through the middle of Case Western Reserve University, puzzling about how to do this. And it quite suddenly occurred to me, and I remember this moment even today, and I remember the inspection hatch in the sidewalk where I was just about to put my foot. It occurred to me that instead of seeing myself as the researcher of other people's relationships, I should turn the whole thing on its head and invite participants to be researchers of their own relationship, and myself as the facilitator of that research process. And I went ahead and did that and completed a PhD using a participatory methodology. When I came back to England after that, I met other people who were doing the same thing. In England, a group of us formed what we called the New Paradigm Research Group. And we began to research for a book, which became Human Inquiry, my first book. And we found people all around the world doing all sorts of interesting things in this kind of a way. Some people doing it around issues of liberation, some people doing it around issues of organisation or community change, some people around questions of feminism and what we now call Black Lives Matter, for example. There were people who were engaged in participatory research around spiritual issues, a whole movement of this kind happening in different parts of the world. And part of my work was to try to help draw these together. But there becomes a problem, because if you think about the nature of science, it depends on this conceit, if you like, on this myth that there's a separation between the researcher here and whatever's being researched over there, what we call subjects, but they're actually objects. And if you take that away and you make the objects into subjects, you've actually undercut the whole of the Western paradigm of science. You've undercut Descartes, really. And so there's a whole intellectual job to be done in reconsidering what are the philosophical underpinnings of science and what therefore are the procedures for making quality work rather than just blundering around in a unsystematic kind of way. And this became, if you like, my life's work as an academic. I also got involved in different ways in the practice of participation. So we had several courses and programs that were designed as participatory endeavours, communities of learning, if you like, with varying degrees of authority retained by faculty or negotiated by faculty. I worked with John Heron on the development of cooperative inquiry, and I've described that in another email. And at the same time, gradually, these primarily humanistic concerns became ecological concerns. There was a gradual movement which was influenced by the growing ecological crisis, and the shift of worldview and the ecological crisis seemed to me to go hand in hand. We've destroyed the world because we see ourselves as part of it. Or we are destroying the world. We haven't done it yet. I was 18 when Silent Spring, which many people say is the foundation of the modern environmental movement, was published. I was 38 when the extraordinary book study Limits to Growth was published. It's been going through my life. And I was also influenced at this time in this whole thing by medicine wheel work, by Buddhist meditation, by Gaia theory and Gaia practice, deep ecology, Gregory Bates and Thomas Berry, the great Catholic geologian, enormous influence on my life. So the increasing question was not just how do you think your way into a participatory world, but how do you actually, well, I like this term, feel it on your pulses, which comes from the poet John Keats. How do we actually live in a participatory world? How do we live ourselves in a world that isn't a world of objects, but a world of subjects? And this is one of the lessons from Thomas Berry, the idea that we don't live in a world, the cosmos is not a collection of objects, it's a communion of subjects. How do we live in that world? And when I retired from formal academic life, I enrolled on a master's in creative writing in order to find a way of expressing this, find a way of expressing those glimpses of a participatory world that I experienced. And I've put some of those together in a collection of articles which you can look at if you like. It'll be on Canvas somewhere. I'll put a link to it. So one of the things I did as part of this was to go off on 2 major sailing pilgrimages in my little yacht Coral. Round Ireland up to the north of Scotland. And I took with me Thomas Berry's invocation, if you like, as a kind of a text. Since he's a priest, I thought it was appropriate to have a text. And he says, "If we do not hear the voices of the trees, the birds, the animals, the fish, the mountains and the rivers, then we are in trouble. That, I think, is what has happened to the human community in our times. We're talking to ourselves. We're not talking to the river. We're not listening to the river. We have broken the great conversation. By breaking the conversation, we have shattered the universe. All these things are happening now as a consequence of this autism." And I recognise it may not be politically correct to use the term autism in that way, but I think you know what he means. We've broken the great conversation. And then more recently, bringing this all up to date, for a long time I've been celebrating the work and using the work of the Australian feminist philosopher Freya Matthews, whose work is at the foundation of this course. And about 18 months ago, I wrote her a fan letter, and we've got to be working together on a variety of things. And what she brings to it is another thing. There was this sense I was pursuing of how do we feel at one with the world as participants of the world. Freya asked the question, if we speak to the world, in what form does it answer back? If the world is a communion of subjects, it's a communion of communication. And we humans, we modern humans, need to find our way back into that communication, into that communicative matrix. And I saw that question as being really deeply appropriate for a new development of cooperative inquiry with people, human people, inquiring with persons in the more than human world. And that's what we've been playing around with, or trying to develop, more than playing around with, taking very seriously these last years. I developed with Freya and with the German biologist, extraordinary, you'll see some of his readings in the course literature. And we developed a cooperative inquiry into panpsychic experience to be part of Schumacher College in Devon, where we were going to work with the River Dart, a great sacred river that runs down from Dartmoor into the sea. And that was cancelled by the coronavirus pandemic. And it immediately occurred to me that I had been invited to offer electives to the TID group at CIIS, and maybe we could do this as a course, as an elective. So I proposed that, and it was accepted with enthusiasm, so that was good. And as I was thinking about how to do that, Jacqueline Curio got in touch with me and very cheekily and appropriately said, could she join as teaching assistant, which was great. I'd worked with her before. And then Jacqueline said, well, if we're going to do this, we better get going. We better try it out. So the two of us started our own little inquiry into communion with our rivers, with my River Avon and her River Glen up in Northumberland in the north of England. And there's a series of strange coincidences or synchronicities. I had a message then from Western Australia, from people working with Indigenous scholars on a project called Voicing Rivers, and we were invited to contribute. Now this felt like we'd started this conversation and now rivers from other side of the world were using humans to get in touch with us. That seemed sufficiently extraordinary to have maybe some other meaning to it. And so Jacqueline and I agreed to contribute to this, and to do that we formed a bigger small cooperative inquiry of 5 of us, people we knew were interested in working with rivers. And we spent the summer, 6 weeks of cycling, action and reflection, exploring the experience of calling to rivers in different kinds of ways and seeing what kind of responses we get. And we're not ready to make that public yet, but that's what we're doing. So what I'm trying to tell you is that this elective is part of a long stream of inquiry in my life and in other people's lives, which you're invited to participate in as fully as you can, and then to take out into your own lives. And there's these 2 questions. If we call to the world, if we call to beings in the world, how do they respond? Do they respond? In what manner do they respond? How do we know if they're responding? That's a big question. But more generally, if we take this idea that the world is not just a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects, how do we live in such a world? How do we live authentically, not just when we're doing a ceremony or a prayer with a river, but moment to moment? So, and we're using Freya Matthews' panpsychism, which is a particular form. She calls it communicative panpsychism, is one of the terms she uses for it. I'm not asking you or not expecting you to study the whole realm of panpsychic philosophy. There's all sorts of different views of it and different versions of it. I'd like you to have some sense of what that is by looking up. We've provided a number of possible readings that will give you the history of it, but just to give you a sense of its breadth. But I want you to really get in depth with understanding Freya's position, and then the main part of this course is to use cooperative inquiry to get into the experience of that in depth. So while we have a couple of weeks at the beginning to read the theory and to discuss the theory amongst ourselves, we'll then have three weeks of intense experiential engagement in which you don't need to do any other reading. You can if you like, but the focus will be on the experience. Then we'll have a couple of weeks where we can reflect and we can read more and we can talk about what's happened. And then we'll have another 3 weeks of intense engagement before leaving space at the end of the semester for drawing all the threads together and preparing your final assignments. So, how's this all going to work? By the end of the first 2 weeks, the first introductory module, I want you to have identified a being in the world that you would like to engage with on this course. It can be a river, that's what we're doing, or we've been doing. It could be a tree, could be a mountain range, could be an animal, could be a flock of animals, could be any. You'll get a sense of what we mean by being in the world from the any organized, self-organizing, self-sustaining, self-maintaining part of the world. They're not a pile of bricks, but something that has the capacity for being self-organizing, not just the capacity, the practice of being. And I want you to hold the intention to adopt as a hypothesis, as a living hypothesis, the ideas of panpsychic, communicative panpsychism. Hold the intention to relate to this as a living being, as a person, and invoke its presence. Invocation is a key thing that Jacqueline's going to make a separate video about, and Freya Matthews will be talking about on a video as well. Ask permission to enter the space and then see how you can engage in a communicative relationship with that being, through calling, through invocation, through song, through prayer, through ceremony, all sorts of different kinds of ways. And notice what happens. Notice the changes in your own mood, the changes in the mood of the land, the synchronicities that may happen, the flock of geese that suddenly land when you talk to the river with completely unexpected, whatever it may be. And find a way to record your experience through your memory, through on-the-spot notes, drawings, photographs, debriefing conversations with other people, through poems, haiku, whatever. And share this on your course folder. We've made folders on OneDrive for each of you that everybody has access to. So we got plenty of space. On the Cooperative Inquiry this summer, we developed 12 gigabytes of experiential records in 4 weeks with videos and stuff like that. So you can develop an awful lot of stuff, and we'll need to keep an eye on that. And discuss this with your fellow students individually. We will make an arrangement so that each of you talks about it with one different student each, one or two different students in each cycle, and chat about it online on the discussion threads. And then when we've done that, how would we then amend this next time? How would we do this differently? So just to give you an example, on our little inquiry this summer, we decided on one cycle that we would all we'd all chant the same chant to the river. And another time we all agreed we'd go down to the river at the same time, which is a bit difficult when you're doing it across the Atlantic and across the continental United States. So that's the plan. That's the outline plan for the course. And I will be doing this as a participant at the same time as you're doing it. We're all in this together, as our English politicians have been saying recently. That's it. I'm really looking forward to this, and I hope you are. Thank you very much.